Beth.
Chair Bernstein, we may begin when you're ready.
Thank you very much. I will call this regular meeting of the Board of Retirement to order. It is exactly 9 o'clock on Wednesday, August 4th. And Bonnie, I'll throw it back to you for the usual housekeeping announcements.
Great, thank you. So this meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Pryor?
Here.
Mr. Knox?
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, Ms. Gray?
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Santos?
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Oakham.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, Mr. Moore.
Here.
Very good, Mr. Keel. Mr. Keel? Yes, you are here. I see your chat. Mr. Robbins is on vacation today. Mr. Harris? Okay, Ms. Zapanta is not participating today, and Chair Bernstein?
I am here.
Great. Staff participating in the meeting include the CEO, Santos Kryman, Deputy CEO, Louis Lugo, AEO, JJ Popowich, Chief Counsel, Stephen Rice, legal staff, Michael Herrera and Frank Boyd, CIO, John Grable, Legislative Affairs Officer, Barry Liu, Interim Systems Manager, Kathy Delino. Division managers and staff include Ted Granger, Carly Natoya, Cynthia Martinez, Tamara Caldwell, Louis Gittins, Cassandra Smith, and consultants participating today are Robert Klausner, Brent Bannister, Janet Jennings, Robert Schmidt, and Irma Rodriguez Muesa. Trustees, please use the Zoom chat option to be placed in the queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until you are ready to speak. And now we may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. We are now on to item 2, approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of July 7th, 2021.
So moved.
Second, Pryor.
Moved by Oakham, seconded by Pryor. Bonnie, can we take a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Knox,
Hi.
Ms. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Mr. Oakham,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Mr. Harris.
What are we voting on?
The minutes, approval of the minutes of July 7th.
Aye.
Thank you. And Chair Bernstein.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
Thank you very much. We're on to item 3, public comment. I believe we had one request from the public to speak. Is that speaker here, Bonnie?
That is correct. We have Michael Ginn. So I will go ahead and admit him into the meeting. We also received a written comment from trustee Joseph Kelly regarding item 7D, which was provided to the Board of Retirement. He will not be making a verbal public comment today. So I'm going to go ahead and admit Mr. Ginn into the meeting. One moment.
Thank you.
Mr. Ginn, go ahead and enter *6 to be unmuted. You will have 3 minutes to address the board, and you may begin now. Mr. Ginn, go ahead and select *6 to be unmuted. Mr. Ginn, go ahead and select *6 to be unmuted so that you may address the board at this time. Okay, Chair Bernstein, there we go. Mr. Ginn, you may address the board. You will have 3 minutes. You may begin now.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Ginn, you may address the board now.
Or I can give my statement?
Yes, you will have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Greetings and salutations to the morning board. My name is Michael A. Quinn, and I'm a member of Downtown Rising. And subject matter today is the continued ongoing struggle regarding the Baldwin Hills Mall. I am aware of LACERA's position regarding their investments, but still have to bring to light the fact that the illegal co-opting of the mall through LACERA is unacceptable. So at this point in time, I stand ready to continue to encourage, egg on, support LACERA's effort to do the right thing, to speak to their investment team at DSW. Regarding this, we have a 2-week reprieve from the current bid holder. We're looking forward to that not taking place, but LACERA is still in a position to do the right thing. And I'm pretty sure you're aware of us. With that said, I'd like you to keep in mind, members of LACERA expect LACERA to do the right thing at all times. Thank you, and I yield back the floor to the moderator. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mr. Ginn. Chair Kehoe, that concludes public comment.
I'm Chair Bernstein, but
So
thank
sorry, I'm doing the
but-
chat and I'm so
but-
sorry.
it's a compliment. And Mr. Gwynn, thank you for your comment. Your item is not on the agenda today, but we appreciate you taking the time to show up and talk to us. We will now move on from public comment. We're on to item 4, other communications. First is June 2021 All-Stars. JJ, is that you?
That is me. Good morning, Chair Bernstein and member and trustees. This is the point in time when we recognize all of those folks at LACERA that have gone above and beyond and helped out their fellow LACERians and our members. And so we put them up on the screen. And so if you'll all virtually recognize Irvin Wu, Ian Duggan, Van Bonifacio, Dean Inoue. Our web watcher is Marilyn Hernandez. There were no rideshare winners this month. And that is our All-Stars. So thank you very much for all you do.
Thank you very much, JJ. We're on to item A2, our CEO's report. Mr. Kryman, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bernstein and trustees. Good morning, everyone. Wanted to provide you with a couple of updates that are some are included in the report that I filed, and one new item as well. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, as you all have read, the Delta variant is moving pretty quickly. Things are evolving in terms of the workplace. The county, I understand, is going to be considering mandatory testing. Mandatory vaccinations with the option of testing if individuals are not inclined to be vaccinated. So we've taken a look at our plans, and Mr. Lugo is going to provide you with a more detailed briefing just after I'm completed. But we are moving and looking at how we're proceeding with the mandatory vaccinations with testing as an option, how that impacts our plans, our reopening plans. We're re-evaluating all the plans, and Mr. Lugo will talk a little bit about that. And so I'll leave it to him to brief you in more detail. I do want to mention also that today or tomorrow, the LACERA elections begin. We've confirmed with the executive office of the Board of Supervisors that the credentials for voting either online or via telephone are going out tomorrow. So everyone should be expecting the credentials as part of their personal email accounts. We provided them with all the information that they need in order to send out those those emails, as well as them leveraging whatever databases they have in terms of the active employees voting. So the voting will begin tomorrow, August 5th, and it'll go through August 31st. So we will, from time to time, be sending out reminders along with the county's reminders for voting. County employees, the active members, can vote on site as well. There's a provision that the county agreed to allow that to happen. So with that, I want to turn it over to Mr. Lugo, if that's okay with you, Chair Bernstein, so that he can kind of walk you through a little bit.
Mr. Lugo, we've already welcomed you, but I believe this is your debut here, so take it away.
You're muted.
I'm muted.
Great way to start the meeting. Thank you, Santos. Good morning, Chair Bernstein. Good morning, trustees. As Santos alluded to, the divisions have been working diligently on plans on returning our staff to the office. We did set a date of September 13th, but over the last 30 days, as Santos alluded to, the landscape has certainly changed as it relates to not only COVID-19 infections, but also hospitalizations, both nationally and definitely locally within LA County. So with that, we've convened as an executive team and decided to take additional steps in terms of the health and safety of not only our staff, but our members. We are looking at some additional approaches to our return to office, one of which is educating, providing more educational opportunities through an educational campaign that our HR team is going to be leading, as well as requiring our staff to either be vaccinated or go through a weekly testing protocol. And then also looking at surveying our staff for to get a sense of what the vaccination rate or status is within LACERA. We understand that this is a a sensitive topic. That's why we made the choice of having an either or. You can either be vaccinated or go through a testing protocol. As Santos mentioned, it's the county's looking at something similar. The city of Los Angeles has issued similar policies, as well as some private entities within the county system and the state of California. We did provide a timeline of our approach internally to staff, and I want to remind the trustees that this is really a staff-focused policy, so it includes our staff, our contractors, and our temporary employees. We did provide a timeline within the memo highlighting our communication to staff. We're going to have an all-staff communication, formal communication from the executive team tomorrow, and our goal is by September 13th to have a detailed process in place as it relates to testing, vaccination, and quite frankly, ensuring that when members and staff arrive, we have a good health and safety system protocol set up. We did validate the state of California has testing sites still available throughout the state and throughout the county, whether it's LA County. We have some staff members that live in Orange County as well. So there's free testing sites as well as free vaccination sites still available throughout our geographic service area. So with that, I'm open to any questions. Like I said, there is a timeline that's highlighted for internal staff as we go through this process of requiring either vaccinations or weekly testing. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
I see. Oh, Mr. Moore, you are here in line for the question.
Okay, my question is, what are the recommended intervals for testing if we offer employees, you either get a vaccine or you participate in a testing protocol? What are the parameters of the testing?
Trustee Moore, so what we're going to do as part of our scheduling within our divisions, we're going to have a in-office week, 1 week organizationally, and an at-home week for staff. So during the at-home week, work from home week, the staff will then be required to test by Wednesday of that week, so we can have results by Friday, and then they can resume work in the office the following week. So it'll be a weekly testing cycle with that happening on their work from home weeks.
Anything else, Mr. Moore? Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I have a follow-up question, if I may.
Please.
How reliable is that an individual tests on Wednesday, get the result by Friday? However, that individual could potentially be infected over the weekend. So, but yet they could be contagious, I guess, by Wednesday of the week that they're back in the office. So how is that testing reliable?
Trustee Santos, that's a good question. And I think one of the things I want to add is there is some fluidity in terms of our plan. Right now, we did look at possibly having staff tested over the weekend, but then we get into overtime and get into a little bit more logistical constraints as it relates to how quickly we can capture those tests and how quickly staff can report. So at this time, we're going to start off with kind of a midweek test, see what that does in terms of some of our data trends. If we do see that we're starting, there's instances of infection rates, then we have to pivot and modify. But from a logistical standpoint, this is kind of the first go around. I'm sure we'll have some additional iterations potentially as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Lugo.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Santos. I have Mr. Kehoe and then Mr. Knox.
Yes, regarding represented employees, have you met and conferred with the union? Has the union agreed to these steps?
Yep, Trustee Kehoe, we do have within our timeline a meeting confer with the union on things that impact represented employees. So the testing protocol, some of those other items. So we will be engaging with the union here in the next week or so, as outlined in our timeline.
So essentially where we're at right now is this is the proposal that the executive office is planning on moving forward with the intention of meeting and conferring with the unions to discuss.
Yes, my understanding in terms of we can require vaccination and or testing. So that's a decisional point that we've made. Now the process and the impact on the staff, we would meet and confer on. We did get counsel from legal. So I don't know if Steve Rice or Joanna may take, if they're able to chime in, but our meet and confer with the union would be more on the impact of the staff and how testing protocols are in place. Not necessarily, I guess, the decision on whether to vaccinate and or test.
Yes, I can just confirm that the scope of the meet and confer will be per the MOU and applicable law.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I have a follow-up question?
Mr. Santos, I'm happy to put you in the queue, but I have Mr. Knox and Mr. Harris, and then we'll come to you.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Is that my
Mr.
cue,
Knox.
Mr. Bernstein? Thank you. Yeah, I understand the different MOUs that LACERA employees have compared to the county, and I get that LACERA is not a county department, but why? What is the reason why we wouldn't want to align with what the county is doing for its employee population and wait to see what kind of program structure they roll out?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, Trustee Knox. We did look at the state and the city of Los Angeles. We were watching the county. I know there's a meeting slated for next week. And I think it aligns with a lot of the things that the city of Los Angeles and the state are doing now. Again, this is effective September 13th, so there is potentially some modifications that we'll make. But we just wanted to make sure we were proactive as we were working through our plans and allowing our staff enough lead time, because right now September 13th is our return to office. That allows 5 weeks. So we wanted to make sure that we allowed staff time to plan whether or not they were going to get vaccinations or other things that they would have to address in terms of returning to the office, and then also internally to make sure that we had enough lead time to work through some of the logistics.
Yeah, Trustee Knox, we wanted to be proactive. The county's issues are a little different. We have a single location. Our staff is very contained. And so those items that the county, we feel that are transferable over to our particular plan, we will use. But I'm not sure what the timing is for them to put that plan together. I know that they have to go through a number of iterations to the plan, and we wanted to make sure that we were going to be ready to open in September, mid-September. Now, that being said, depending on what goes on with the Delta variant, we may push that back, but we want to make sure that we express the urgency to our management team to reevaluate their return to office plans, because there are adjustments that are going to need to be made just from what we've learned to this day. So I do also want to mention that we have conferred with the unions in terms of the reporting protocols for vaccinations, and we're working on securing the database and meeting all the HIPAA requirements so that we can collect the data and safely secure it moving forward. Not only the vaccination cards or whatever verification an employee may provide, but also the testing results as well. And so we're working through a lot of logistics, and we just wanted to make sure that we alerted the board of what we're doing moving forward.
Yeah, and I guess one last comment would be, I think it's helpful to have that target date of September 13th But I think, like you said, it's going to need to be fluid. On the county side, we were prepping to open up everything post Labor Day, and now that's gone into much more of a gray area because of the variant. So yeah, there's gearing up for something and being ready, and then there's, I think, pressing pause and waiting to see what everybody else is doing.
Right.
Thank you,
Mhm.
Mr. Bernstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knox. I have Mr. Harris, and then the other two speakers or commenters have withdrawn, so that's the last person in the queue unless anyone wants to be added.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. My question is, I read in one of our reports that we only have about a 10% rate of vaccination, either reporting that they've been vaccinated or having actually been vaccinated. And I'm wondering, do you have a feel on that? Is that vaccine hesitancy or just a reluctance to tell us if they have or have not been vaccinated, or it's just old data and perhaps it's better today? But that 10% number just really shocked me.
That report was we haven't required our staff to report what their status is. That was just the individual that volunteered the information. And so we were hopeful that more folks would provide us with the information, but now there'll be a letter going out either to tomorrow, I believe, that explains the reporting requirements. It is mandatory for our staff now to report their status, their vaccination status. And so we're moving forward with that, creating the databases, securing it. Carly and her team will be the only staff members that will have access to that information, and they will be confirming everyone's status and also confirming the results of the testing if that's needed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do not have anyone else in the queue. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Lugo, thank you for the update. Mr. Kryman, thank you for the report. Is there anything else?
Thank you, Chair Bernstein.
Thank you. Mr. Kryman, are you done?
Yes, I'm finished.
Thank you very much. We are then moving on to item 5, consent items. I've had no requests for items to be pulled for discussion, so I would be happy to entertain a single motion to move items 5A to 5C.
Keith, I'll second.
Was that Oakham who moved? It was a little, okay. So
Is that, can you hear me better, Alan?
I can hear you better now, yes.
Sorry, it was Oakham, I think.
Sure, then the motion is moved by Mr. Oakham and seconded by Mr. Knox. And Bonnie, could you please take a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Ms. Gray,
Aye.
thank you. Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Mr. Oakham,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Mr. Harris,
Aye.
Chair Bernstein.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
Thank you very much. Item 6 is excluded consent, but nothing was excluded. So we are moving on to item 7. 7A is a recommendation submitted by our CEO and our interim chief financial officer that the board accept the July 1st, 2020 LA County OPEB program actual valuation report. And I have Mr. Granger here, and I believe there is also a presentation from our actuary, Milliman.
Yes, good morning, Chair Bernstein and Board of Retirement Trustees. My name is Ted Granger. I'm with the LACERA Financial and Accounting Services Division. Presenting today should be some familiar names and faces. We have Robert Schmidt and Janet Jennings, our consulting actuaries from Milliman. We also have Brent Bannister, our reviewing actuary from Kavanaugh McDonald Consulting. We're here to discuss the results of the 2020 Other Post-Employment Benefits, or OPEB valuation. This report contains OPEB program funding metrics, which is actual information that is used by plan sponsors to make funding decisions. The actual information in this report is also used as a basis to prepare the accounting notes and disclosures the plan sponsors use for their financial statements. The review report is prepared by Kavanaugh McDonald Consulting. It discusses the actuarial review process that was completed for the 2020 OPEB valuation. A couple of quick notes on the reporting cycle. As you may recall, back in January, we provided the board with a brief educational session which outlined this 2020 OPEB reporting cycle. In March, we presented the investigation of experience study report. The board approved the actuarial assumptions. Those assumptions were used as inputs in preparing this valuation report. These two reports that we're presenting today, the valuation and the review of the valuation, will conclude the 2020 reporting cycle for OPEB. The next report will be the annual valuation for 2021. Milliman will start working on that later this month. There are 4 reports in the materials. There were a lot of materials attached. We have the 2020 OPEB val. We have the 2020 experience study, which again was presented last time. And we have the 2 review reports from Kavanaugh McDonald, one of the valuation and one of the experience study. And finally, just a couple quick notes on the valuation report. I just want to remind the board that the valuation report is based on the agent model structure that focuses on the liability and funding information for the 3 primary agents pre-funding through the OPEB trust. Those agents are, again, Los Angeles County, the Superior Court, and LACERA. The report includes the outside district information as one group, since these plan sponsors do not participate in the OPEB trust. And finally, we do include information for the total collective OPEB program plan sponsors, meaning we want to provide a sort of a global view of the valuation metrics. So that information is also aggregated and included in the report. The slides that we have presenting were also included in the board materials. So with that, unless there's any questions for me, I'm going to hand it over to Robert Schmidt, unless there's any questions for me.
I do not see any questions in the queue. Is there anyone with a question? Then let's move forward.
Great.
Hey, thank you, Ted and Mr. Chair and members of the board. It's our pleasure to give you our annual presentation on the valuation results for the OPEB program. So next slide, please. Our agenda for today will be to kind of review what we've been doing, the process, the timeline, and then a brief review of the assumptions, and then jump right into the valuation summary results, which will be new information since our last meeting when we talked about the experience study. And then look at a little history and projections, then take questions and comments, and give Brent some time to talk about the review that they did of our work. So go ahead and proceed. So the highlights here, to kind of give you an idea where we're headed, is that we talked earlier this year about the experience study and actuarial review from Kavanaugh McDonald. As Ted said, we're continuing with the agent structure. We talked about that. Also, the new information for this point is that if you compare the 2019 and 2020 valuations, you'll see there is a small increase in liabilities and costs, although it's less of an increase than we expected to see based on the passage of time, because there was an offset by some favorable July 1, 2021 health insurance renewals, and then we had good claim cost experience. We will also show that the employer contributions are progressing toward reaching the actuarially determined contribution. We estimate that'll happen in 8 or 9 years for the county and LACERA, a little bit longer for the Superior Court because they are funding at a little bit less, a lesser rate than the county and LACERA. And we'll also show that membership does continue to increase.
So in terms of the timeline that we had for this actuarial valuation cycle, Ted hit the highlights, and this is just a chart that shows the green is the meetings that we've had and the blue is the activities. So we did start receiving the data last August and had an entrance meeting with the stakeholders in October. We then worked on the census and experience study through February. In January, we did provide an educational presentation to the Board of Retirement. And then in February, we had a stakeholder assumptions meeting. We met with you, the Board of Retirement, in March to go through the OPEB investigation of experience study. And we also received the 7/1/2021 premiums that we then included in the first year trend for the 2020 funding valuation. We had our closing stakeholder meeting in June, and here we are in August at the Board of Retirement meeting. In terms of the process summary, our last experience study was 2 years ago, and our last OPEB funding valuation was 1 year ago. Our next OPEB funding valuation will continue with 2021, and we'll continue with annual funding valuations. And then we'll return to a 3-year cycle for the next OPEB experience study. I mentioned that we had some stakeholder meetings. Those stakeholders include the agents that pre-fund, LA County, Superior Court, and LACERA. The union is included, as well as Siegel, the health consultant. All the actuaries represent these groups. Chiron represents LA County. Kavanaugh McDonald is a reviewing actuary. Rail and Letson represents the union, and Milliman is there for LACERA. So this shows more about what is reviewed at each activity. In the experience study assumptions, we include the demographic and economic assumptions from the 2019 retirement benefit study. And those include things like mortality, withdrawal, termination. In the OPEB experience study, we do review the vested terminated members' retirement rates. And we also look at OPEB demographic assumptions, including how likely is it that once someone retires, they will enroll. And once they do enroll, what plan and tier would they select? And we look at other OPEB assumptions such as remarriage. We also look at 2020 OPEB economic assumptions like discount rate and trend. Once we get to the valuation, we then determine the claim cost assumptions, and we update the trend with the July 1, 2021 health plan premiums. The valuation is based on the June 30, 2020 census data, and we use the health plan premiums from July 1, 2020 and July 1, 2021. Next, Robert will talk about the assumptions in more detail.
Okay, so the investment return assumption was set in the 2020 experience study that we discussed back in March. So agents that are pre-funding are continuing with that 6% return, and that's based on Makita's 2020 capital market assumptions. The agents that are not pre-funding through the trust have an expected return of 2.3%, which is based on the return that's estimated on the county's general assets. That assumption for those agents was previously 3.69%. The following assumptions then were updated after the 2020 experience study. So this will be where I'll be showing you the impact of some new assumptions that were updated after that study. The first is the medical and dental vision claim costs. So those are the starting claims that we use in our valuation for the first year, the 2020-2021 fiscal year. And then the health trend rates get updated with the impact of the July 1, 2021 renewal, which we received after that experience study as well. And that affected the medical and the dental and vision premiums. And I'll show you the impact of that in a little bit as well. So this is just an illustration to review the investment return. So this is something that we've gone through before, but it just shows you in pictorial form which of the pre-funding agents are at 6%, and then the outside district agents being at the 2.3% discount rate. That long-term rate of 6% is unchanged from the previous experience study. And the 2.3, as I said, is an update this year. and it does cause a de minimis in the increase in the overall liability and contribution, but it's pretty minor overall. So next, we're going to look at the summary results. So when we talked to you about the experience study, we would have been talking about the July 1, 2019 valuation. That's the $20.75 billion accrued liability showing there. And then we talked in detail about the 0.31 billion increase due to the OPEB experience study. So that increase then has been added on to. First of all, we looked at the impact of what we would have expected liabilities to do over the 1-year period from July 1 of 2019 to July 1 of 2020. And that's a 1.25 billion increase simply due to accrual of interest and service, another year of service, meaning an additional accrual of benefits for the active members. So we would have been at 22.31 billion at July 1 of 2020 had all the assumptions come true from the prior year. However, what we saw that actually happened was that the claim costs came in a little bit favorable. So our premiums, the first year premiums came in a little favorable. It's about a 0.7% reduction in that actual accrued liability, or $0.16 billion. We also updated our long-term trend assumption, and that was about an $840 million increase. I'm sorry, a decrease in the liability, and that's about another 3.8% reduction for that trend assumption. And then there were very little other gains and losses. So we ended up at about $21.3 billion as of July 1, 2020, which, as you can see, is an increase from the prior year, but it's less of an increase than would have been expected under if all the assumptions had come true. So some good actual gains here. We also had a little bit of an asset loss. The actual asset performance was slightly less than the 6%, and this again is for the fiscal year ending June 30 of 2020. So this does not reflect the year just ended. This is fiscal 2020. And as you can see, the normal cost rate and ADC percentage ended up actually lower than they were in the prior valuation after all of the items were taken into account.
This next chart shows how the actuarial accrued liability stacks up between the different benefits that LACERA provides. The medical is the bulk of the benefits and is about 78%. Next is the Medicare Part B, which is 3.3 billion or 16% of the total actuarial accrued liability. The dental and vision is 5% or 1.1 billion, and the $5,000 retiree death benefit is 1%. If we look at the same actual accrued liability by member status, the actives are about half of that liability, and the retirees are just under half, with the remaining liability for those deferred vested members. And Robert will talk next about the projected paid benefits.
So earlier I mentioned that not only did we have a little bit lower claim costs than we thought, but we also revised the trend assumptions to be a bit lower in the long run. So those two items result in our new benefit payment projection, which is the blue bars, being slightly less than the benefit payment projection in the green bars that we had in the July 1, 2019 valuation. And that's what's being illustrated here. On the next slide, we'll start getting into some historical information. So our first valuation year was 2006. And for several valuations, we used the same discount rate for pre-funding agents as outside districts. And that was because there was no pre-funding actually happening yet. So there was no need to have a separate discount rate for the funding agents. The break between 2014 and 2016 was the initial valuation there with trust assets being 2014, and then in 2016 was the first valuation where we reflected tier 2. And just recall that the impact of creating tier 2 is that liabilities are projected to now grow more slowly than they would have before the introduction of tier 2, but they are of course still growing over time as new people come into the system and benefits continue to rise with healthcare inflation. In addition, we began annual valuations with the 2017 valuation. We had the initial agent valuation, and you started to see the bifurcated discount rate between pre-funding and outside districts who are not pre-funding in 2018. And we've maintained that same structure since then. On the next slide, we show you how the membership has changed over time from 2006, again, starting with our first valuation and ending with our 2020 valuation. And we can see that active membership has risen 12.9% over that 14-year period. The number of vested terminated members has also increased by almost 16%. And then by far the largest increase has been those that are retired or survivors with medical. And what we see there is almost a 35% increase over that time. That is a result of a couple of factors. One is over this period, life expectancies have generally increased over that time. And also we are now into the wave of baby boomer retirements, which is putting more people onto the retired rolls than we had been previously. We also look at the history of the liabilities and the assets. And what we can see here is that there have been steady growth in the assets. Since we started funding, we were at about $1.5 billion in assets. Over the same period of time, liabilities rose for a while and then they declined. And that's mostly driven by discount rate. So from 2014 to 2016, the discount rate was raised from 3.75 to 4.5%. That caused, was a major factor behind that reduction. And then since 2017, the liability also dropped due largely again to an interest rate or discount rate increase from 4.5% to 6%. We've also had, in general, gains on claim costs over this time and slight lowering of long-term trend assumptions. So that's the other factor that's keeping these liabilities from increasing as rapidly as we might have seen otherwise. Okay, on the next slide, we look at the contributions coming in compared to the ARC, which was a GASB 45 defined term, and now under GASB 74-75, it's called the ADC. It's a similar measurement. We're measuring it basically the same way, so they're very comparable concepts. But what we're showing here is the progress in actual employer contributions toward that goal of ultimately reaching the ADC. In 2014, there was a spike in contributions because there was an infusion of cash into to get the trust started. And so ever since then, the contributions we're showing here are really the sum of the employer contributions to the trust and the benefit payments, which are also considered contributions as well. So those are continuing to bring the contributions ever so slightly closer to that ARC or ADC. And the ultimate goal, as we'll see when we start looking at projections, is to reach the ADC with those contributions. The next slide will look at these same contributions as a percentage of payroll. And since payroll generally rises from year to year, this is overall payroll due to population growth and salary growth, what we see is that the trend here in the ARC or ADC is a decline in the contribution as a percent of payroll, the required contribution or the actuarially determined contribution. And then when we look at the actual contributions, those have gradually increased because of the funding schedule that the county is using largely, and LACERA is kind of going in lockstep with that schedule, has increased to around 10.5% of payroll in the most recent year. Now we'll shift gears and start looking at projections a little bit. And what we do is we look at where we are today. That's about 20 billion in liabilities and about 1.5 billion in assets. And we roll the clock forward, assuming contributions occur as planned and investment returns continue at 6% per year. And what we see is generally rising liability and asset value. Not much change in the distance between those two lines, but an improvement in the funded ratio over time. And the next slide will show you how that funded ratio is projected to change over time. You know, from around 5 or 6% today, up into the 50 to 60% range by the mid 2040s, which is solid progress over this period of time. This next slide here, 27, shows you, kind of takes off from a couple slides ago where we were talking about the ADC being higher than what's being contributed today. But this shows you then for the county, based on the contribution schedule, how long we project it will take for the total employer contribution each year to ultimately reach that ADC level around the year 2029. Finally, are there any questions or comments before we hand the floor over to Mr. Bannister?
Are there any questions or comments?
You know, Alan, I just have some, and I understand this is actuarial and this is projections, but is it a concern that we're going to be at about what? About 70 billion? I mean, the differential is not changing. And how do you get that differential down? I know we're projecting 6%, but how do we get that differential closer, you know, the two lines closer? The actuarial accrued liability and the market value of assets. How does that get closer? Or are we not concerned about that differential, which is what, 20 billion? John,
Yes.
did I lose you?
No, I understand your question, Mr. Chair and Mr. Oakham. The main reason that gap is not getting narrower, even though the funded ratio is improving, the gap is still there. But the main reason for that is that the projected funding once the county reaches the ADC would be a 30-year amortization of the liability. It's a rolling 30. It's not a closed. It's a rolling open 30. And we did talk about this concept a couple of board meetings ago, where at some point there will probably be a decision to be made on whether contributions should be increased such that the amortization period is less than that 30 years, and ultimately with the potential to actually pay off the unfunded, at which point the assets and liabilities would be equal. That's
Okay.
really a discussion that the plan sponsor would need to undertake and decide if they want to contribute at a greater rate. But that's the reason.
Okay, I've got one other question, Bob. Your projections on the claims, you reduced that. because this last year, year and a half, we had a reduction in claims because of COVID. Do you think that reduction will continue as people start getting older and cost of healthcare gets more expensive? So do you feel that's conservative enough by reducing those claims, all the way up to 2030?
Yes, Mr. Oakham and Mr. Chairman. The change we made has to do with a general lowering in long-term economic factors, which drive health costs as a percent of the nation's gross domestic product. We do build, you talked about people aging, and I will say that we do build aging assumptions in. So as the population ages, we've already taken that into account. But if costs go up in addition to aging, you're right that factor is a bit lower. And it is based on our overall projections of how much this nation is willing to spend overall in healthcare, and that will reach a limit at some point in time, and that limit is that we're getting closer to that limit, a little bit closer every year. So that does impact our projections, and we still do feel that the projections are adequate at this time.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
I have Mr. Moore next.
Okay, my question is there anything that you see going on in Washington, D.C. surrounding the human infrastructure spending on prescription drugs, Social Security and Medicare, or anything else that can change that liability projection for us?
Thank you, Mr. Moore and Mr. Chairman. There are some things going on with respect to human infrastructure. There has been talk about potentially reducing the Medicare eligibility age. That could well put more of people on Medicare, which would have the effect of lowering the costs of this program, since this program, covers essentially what Medicare doesn't cover. So that's one thing I'm aware of, and that those are, the idea of changing the Medicare age has been toyed with, although farther back, there was talk about actually raising the Medicare age. Now that the talk is potentially lowering it, so that would affect liabilities. But I'm not aware of a lot of other things that would materially impact it. I think the Medicare age is probably the main one.
Thank you. I don't have anyone else in the queue. Ted, I believe we have a little bit more presentation.
Yeah, if we could hand the floor over to Brent Bannister from Kavanaugh McDonald, he'll make a couple of comments on his actuarial review report.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is real brief. We do a lot of work, but we can boil it down pretty quickly. And really what it comes down to is, as we look at Milliman's work, it's solid. Again, we reviewed the experience study concurrently with them and discussed those results with you back a few months ago. For this valuation, we looked at the data work that was being done, and yeah, there was one little tiny thing that probably didn't affect the rounding hardly, but that's that's what we like, I guess, is that we were able to look at it, know that we're looking at it well enough if we can find something, but also glad that it doesn't make a difference. We then independently valued all the liabilities that are kind of underlying the calculations that Milliman showed. As much as possible, we try to do it independently, not trying to do it the way they do it, because all that proves is we can both code software the same way and get the same, the software is consistent. Instead, we're really coding our software independently, and so we don't expect to match exactly. But what we ended up with are results that are very comparable, and confirm that what Milliman's doing is appropriate, that it makes sense. We tossed in a couple ideas of things we think they could look at for improvement in the future. But the bottom line, we believe what they're providing you is appropriate information. It reflects what's going on with the program. It's appropriate for your financial statements and for your funding decisions. And we think, you know, their work is good, solid work. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Brent, thank you for that confirmation. Does anyone have any questions about this part of the presentation or comments? Ted, anything else before we turn to a motion and deliberation?
I just wanted to thank our stakeholder group, our folks from the county, and all of our respective professional consultants. It's a long project. There's a lot involved, and I think it's a great report and a great result. So thank you.
Thank you all for the work and for the presentation. I agree. I'd be happy to entertain a motion.
So moved. I thought it was a good report.
I'll second.
Moved by Oakham, I believe seconded by Harris, I heard first. Is there any further questions or discussion before we vote? Bonnie, please take the roll call.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Ms. Gray,
Aye.
thank you. Mr. Santos, I believe, had to step out. Mr. Oakham. Mr. Oakham, I'll come back to you.
Oh, no, you can't hear me?
Very good. Yes, thank you
I'm
so
sorry.
much.
I put it by my mouth. Thank you.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Mr. Harris,
Aye.
Chair Bernstein.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
Okay, and Ted and our consultants, thank you again for all your work in bringing this to us. We will
Thank
move.
you.
Thank you. We will move on now to item 7B, a recommendation submitted by Mr. Kryman and myself that the board review and approve the issuance of an RFP for a strategic planning consultant. And there is a memo dated July 28th, 2021.
Quick question.
Yes.
Yeah, so just for the selection committee, that wasn't addressed in the memo. Can you just relay what that's going to be looking like?
Mr. Kryman, do you want to handle that or should I?
I think you should handle that ad hoc issue.
The anticipation is it'll be an ad hoc committee that will limit the participation. I presume there'll be 4 trustees and then a small equivalent or slightly smaller number of key staff.
Perfect. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? And if not, I'd be happy to entertain a motion.
Yeah, I'm move it. Oakham moves it.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Alan?
I can. Thank you, Ron.
I submitted a question, Al.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I please go ahead. Well, hang on. Can I get a second on the motion?
I can do it after the second, yeah. I'll second it.
Okay, so moved by Oakham, seconded by Moore. That makes it easy. And Mr. Moore, please give us your question.
Yeah, it's I think on the draft, the memo, you had the LACERA expects the respondents to have 3 to 5 years. And in the draft request for proposal, it says 5 to 7 years. So which one is it?
We're going to go with the 3 to 5 years. We want to as broad a consultants as we possibly can. So we'll make that adjustment.
Okay. Okay, and then I had this other comment about information that we're providing about LACERA in the introduction and the background where we talk about the membership. You know, I think it needs to have a little bit more information about demographics and how diverse our organization is. Not just, you know, well, male, female is split. When you look at the racial demographics, is, it's in that range of 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%. And we have union and non-union, and we have safety and non-safety all in the same plan. And so I think that's important that all of that's included. And I would point out that we just went through our actuary review, and that's kind of the level of detail that they're engaged in actuarially. And so I think it would be appropriate to carry over that kind of information to whoever the strategic planning folks are, so that they understand that, you know, our system is one of the most diverse from a lot of different perspectives than most in the country, and we're very large.
I believe it would be easy to incorporate that. I don't even know if it needs to be incorporated into the motion or if we can just expand the background, but
yeah, that's all.
Okay.
We'll make the adjustment.
Steve, do we need to formally incorporate that into the motion, or can we just adjust the background before we issue the RFP?
We have direction. We can just incorporate that additional, the adjustment of the correction of the 3 to 5 years, and then the expansion of the information about the diversity of the membership into the RFP without, just based on that direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for the excellent suggestion. Do we have any other comments or questions before we vote? Bonnie, let's please take a roll call.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Santos, he has not joined back. Okay. Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Mr. Harris?
Aye.
Chair Bernstein?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. We are now on to item C. This is a recommendation submitted by trustees Kehoe and Oakham that the board engage for a trial period from September through January of reducing the meetings and making some modifications to the committee structure. There is a memo dated July 23rd, 2021. Mr. Kehoe or Mr. Oakham, do you want to take the floor first? If not, I'm happy to open it up to anyone.
Mr. Keel, do you want to jump on this one? We lose him?
Yeah. As you can hear me, perfect. So this item came out of a discussion with the JOGC. During the JOGC discussion, there were some concerns raised by a number of trustees, specifically trustees that are serving on both boards, with the time commitments required for all the boards and committee meetings and all of those. So during the discussion, one of the recommendations from the Board of Retirement side was the possibility of combining the administrative and disability meeting that we have before in the past, and to have everything in one day. So this proposal is brought up out of that and gives us the opportunity to discuss it, the possibility of doing it on a trial period and seeing how that impacts, if it is viable or if it's not, and to go from there. So it'd be a 4-month trial period, September through January, and then in January, it would be something that would be looked at once again. So I thought that this incorporated the overall thought process from those involved in the meeting, and is bringing it here to have a discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oakham. Is there anything you'd like to add? So I would need a motion, and then of course I'm happy to entertain questions and discussion.
I'll motion the.
Mr. Kehoe, go ahead.
Moved by Kehoe. Is it seconded? Mr. Knox, was that a second?
It was, thank you.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. I have first Mr. Harris in the queue, and then Mr. Rice.
I'm in the
Thank
queue
you,
too.
Chair Bernstein. Again, although my comments may be more on point with an agenda item yet to come. I find it interesting that this came up at a jog C as opposed to at a full board meeting before we got to this point of the recommendation, which concerns me because we aren't all on jog C. I know we're all invited, but again, it's the issue of how many meetings. This seems like a rather convoluted way to reduce meetings to achieve maybe a different objective. I'm also interested, although I do not disagree with the third recommendation as far as the Disabilities Committee. It would have been nice if perhaps someone on discussing this might have at least reached out to the chair or the vice chair of that committee. And I don't know that, I know I was not contacted. I don't know that Mr. Santos was, just as a courtesy to talk to us about it. Although, like I say, I do not disagree with that. I am basically opposed to this. If you want to do it on a trial basis while we are in the virtual mode, I don't have a major problem with that. But once we go back to the non-virtual mode, I would, right at this point, knowing what I know right now, and of course, subject to change with additional information, I would be unequivocally opposed to this. I think it's going to make those once a month meetings of the retirement board horrific. And I'm the only person on this board right now who would be impacted probably the least, because I don't ever have to get on a freeway to drive to or from LACERA. All the rest of you do. And that in and of itself, I think would make that proposal unworkable. Not only that, but just the length of a meeting like that. I just see this as being counterproductive, and I think it's being brought forward for ulterior motives. But I am in favor, if you want to try it on a trial basis, as long as we're in a virtual mode, if that's the will of the group. But I would otherwise be absolutely opposed to this.
I was muted. I have Mr. Rice in the queue, then Ms. Gray, then Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Chair Bernstein. Trustees, I don't have any comments one way or the other on the merits of the proposition. I just wanted to clarify that it is in order. The regulations of the board provide a specific meeting schedule that does provide for 2 meetings. So if this proposal passes, these joint meetings will be special meetings, which we do a couple of times a year in any event. So I just simply wanted to clarify that point just in terms of how we would notice the meetings if this passes, and that it is similar to what we do in other circumstances in combining the meetings of the 2 monthly meetings for other reasons, scheduling or other purposes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now have Ms. Gray, then Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Chair Bernstein. Although I serve on the JOGC committee and I do recall the discussions, I am personally not in favor of combining meetings for 2 reasons. Number one, the Board of Retirement serves both active and retirees to the tune of about 150,000 employees. 150,000 members. I think we owe it to them to give them our full attention from the standpoint of not having timed meetings. When we put together the agenda, usually there is like a time schedule. To have a report here is going to take minutes, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is staff puts a lot of work into every aspect and every agenda item that we have. And it isn't fair to staff, number one, to cut them off because we only have to get through everything in one day. I think we are doing a disservice to our members and not fulfilling our fiduciary duties to give it our all. The second issue that I see is that I agree, number one, with Mr. Harris that, yes, commute will be horrendous for us, particularly for me going and coming. But that's minuscule. My problem coming and going is minuscule. There's always traffic in LA. But I really feel that we have to give each portion of our administrative and our disability meetings everything we've got, particularly when I look at the number of non-consent disability cases that we have, say, this month. There are 10 of them. I think there's also a couple of appeals. I thought I saw it. I have to look again. But that means that in our comments and discussions, we're going to cut ourselves off because we're going to be looking at our watches trying to see, oh my God, it's getting late. We have X, Y, and Z to cover. The next thing is quorum. Many of us, not me, but some, will have to leave because they have other appointments or they're running a business or they have golf games or whatever. They have something else that they have to get to. As an elected county employee, my first responsibility, and I believe it is in our, is it our SURL? I know it's not a policy, it's a requirement that our duties on this Board of Retirement come first. And I don't think that we can fulfill all of our duties if we just combine the meetings and stay until we drop dead at 5 o'clock. So I am definitely not in favor of this.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. I have Mr. Moore, then Mr. Knox.
I think, am I unmuted? Yeah, okay.
You are, yes.
Yeah, okay. I can't support this recommendation because first of all, it's coming from the JOG-C and it's not coming from an ad hoc committee of the Board of Retirement to review its own schedule. So I got a problem with that. Secondly, changing the BOR agenda and meeting structure to accommodate members who are on both boards is not a reason to change the agenda and the meeting schedule for the BOR. Then I have a problem with the deliberation time when you combine everything into one meeting. That means you will not be able to deliberate effectively on any particular issues that might come up in committee or the administrative meeting if you're being pressed by a disability hearing schedule that consumes 4 to 6 hours maybe. And finally, the way the structure is right now, I get 2 to 3 weeks sometimes to review the disability cases. Given the current schedule, I'd have 1 week to prepare for all the committee meetings and the disability hearings. I got about a week to 10 days to do all of that. So the schedule works just fine for me as a Board of Retirement member. I see no reason to change it unless you could tell me that somehow it's going to make me more effective. And if that is the case, I think that ought to come from an ad hoc committee that the chair appoints to look at it.
I've got Mr. Knox and then Mr. Kehoe, just as a point of information, and Mr. Rice, please feel free to speak up if I don't get this right. This item did not come from the JOG-C. I think it originated based on individual trustees' reflection of a conversation that occurred at the JOG-C, but this item was requested for the agenda by 2 trustees of the Board of Retirement, which under our operating structure is permitted. Trustees are allowed to agendize items. I just wanted to clarify that. I don't think that changes people's opinions on the matter, but I just wanted to clarify how it arrived on our agenda.
Yes, that's correct. There were some comments about time required and workload and so forth at the JOG-C discussion of the trustee as employee. item a couple of weeks ago, but there was no JOGC action. This is not a JOGC recommendation. It is simply a motion, as you say, Chair Bernstein, that's made by 2 Board of Retirement trustees pursuant to the process that's provided in the Board of Retirement regulations.
I have Mr. Knox and then Mr. Kehoe in the queue.
Thank you, Chair Bernstein. I seconded the motion for the sake of discussion. I'm on the fence. I wanted to hear the perspectives of my fellow trustees. I appreciate Mr. Harris and Ms. Gray's positions on this. Couple thoughts. I think part of what is causing some of the fatigue is just the general number of meetings we have overall. I was looking at the summary memo last year, and I forget how many meetings it was, with joint meetings and JOGC meetings. I think overall, and I know we're going to continue this conversation in a later agenda item, I think there's ways to address some of this without combining 2 of the BOR meetings, especially as Ms. Gray points out. I think there's going to be a fair amount of fatigue at the end of a long day like that. And I'm concerned that if we're getting into disability cases, that we're, at least from my perspective, I won't assign this to anybody else, but from my perspective, not being able to give the same level of engagement or focus to a case late in the day that is really important to that particular member versus, if we would have started out on a separate day and had a meeting in the morning. So, I could see testing this over the course of a couple meetings, maybe when we have less disability cases, but then what do we do when we get to the meetings where we have many more of them? And then the only other point I was going to make was at the end of the introductory memo, it just said the board leadership elected in January 2022 can reevaluate this change and determine the best path moving forward. And I don't know that, listening to what I've heard from some of the other trustees, that is necessarily going to be the will of the majority of the trustees rather than just the leadership at that time. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. I have Mr. Kehoe, then Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Bernstein, you kind of covered what I was going to highlight. This is actually has nothing to do with the JOGC other than the fact that there were a number of trustees in a properly agendized board meeting that brought up concerns regarding this. And it was something that myself and Mr. Oakham had discussed. There is no ulterior motives. I don't know what that comment was about. It was simply
next time you can bring a couple of Diet Cokes.
It was simply just the ability to have a discussion here. We're limited by the Brown Act, which is why I didn't reach out to other trustees. Myself, Mr. Oakham, Mr. Bernstein as the chair were brought into the conversation. We're getting dangerously close to having too much. So it was simply put together as a topic of discussion. And I thought that this captured most of the discussion points, and just want to highlight that this was specifically put together as a trial period with an actual sunset clause for these specific reasons. So this, the whole point is specific to Board of Retirement, nothing to do with JOGC. It's to have a discussion here. I don't think we need an ad hoc committee to sit down and discuss it. I think we could discuss it right here as we're doing, and ultimately decide if that's the direction that we want to go. If it's my observation so far from our past board meetings have been that these could easily be combined. We've had a number of board meetings on the administrative side that have been really quick. In fact, quite frankly, only the burial this is what's most likely going to cause this to be a longer meeting. So for the most part, I do believe that we could combine the meetings, which is why I brought the motion forward. But I just want to highlight that there's no ulterior motives from here. This isn't anything beyond that. I want to have a discussion here in the boardroom, and we're limited by the Brown Act. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. I have Mr. Pryor and then Mr. Santos.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, it's not a bad idea to explore. I'm against it, but just because I remember back when we did have this prior to the current configuration, we did do everything in one day. And as I think Miss Gray forecasted fairly well what that was like. And you know, Sean's right. We've had some brief days recently, but we've also had quite a few days that if we combine the two meetings, we would be here till 3, 4, or 5 in the afternoon. And when the board's meetings were consolidated and we did all this in one day, there was many days where we were here till 3, 4, or 5. And the way she described it is exactly right, and that people just wanted to make quick decisions and get out the door. And I found that a little bit uncomfortable. And that was the reason that we split to these two meetings, was that we found it really hard to finish the day's business all in one sit down. And so I, to be honest, I've worked under both systems. I like having it 2 days. It's way more comfortable and bearable to get through the meetings. And I prefer we keep it the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor. I have Mr. Santos and then Mr. Oakham.
Thank you. No, I agree with Mr. Kehoe. In fact, I think I was the one who mentioned or suggested at the last board meeting that perhaps we should evaluate combining the two meetings. So there's no shenanigans going here. This is as straightforward as it can be. You know, some of the comments that I heard from my colleagues, and I apologize, I was in another meeting, so I missed some of the arguments. However,
she's okay.
Some of the comments against combining the two meetings are reminiscent of what we went through in the Board of Investments. Everybody predicted that we were going to be there till 5 p.m., that it was unbearable. Nevertheless, we made the decision. The decision included started at 8 a.m. for the committees. The big issue of the Board of Investments at the time was the committees, and we didn't have that many committees as we have now. Since we combined the two meetings, the asset committees were established, and we continue to meet on a regular basis with those committees. And some of my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we usually finish around noontime, thereabouts. So it's just a matter of being efficient and also thinking about, like, for example, I believe in one of the documents, whether in this meeting or at the JAC, there's evaluation as to whether or not we should eliminate a particular committee. So thinking and having discussions about how efficient we can be in trying new things are really key, because that helps us be more efficient all the way around. So I'm in favor, or at least going on an interim basis from September, as suggested by the memo, to December. And what we can do in December, we can reevaluate how we've been doing. And that way, the new leadership on the board hopefully will have the opportunity to weigh in December to see how things have developed and help us make an educated decision in January where we want to continue this or go back to the old system. So that's my views. I'm in favor of combining the meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Thank you. Mr. Oakham, then Mr. Knox.
Yeah, I think everybody has a choice to make, whatever they're more comfortable with, and that's why it was put on this agenda. And we will respect, and I will respect all your decisions. If we go back in time on this board, you know, because of people traveling, we haven't been traveling, because of conventions, SACers, and the rest of them, we combined meetings. I think the latest we ever got one of those out of one of those meetings was 3 o'clock. But usually, as I remember, it was 1 o'clock, something like that. Don't forget, we're going to start at 8. The Board of Investments, for those of you, you know as well as I do, they start at 8. Some of those meetings go to 2 or 3 o'clock. I think it makes it a lot easier. I travel the shortest distance. So that, from that standpoint, doesn't make any difference to me. You know, I'm 5 minutes away. But I think, as Mr. Santos said, it is more efficient. I don't think there were many times that we will, you know, be past 2 o'clock, mostly 1 o'clock, as I remember, we have combined meetings. So you guys make the decision. I think it would be a good option to try it. And then if you don't like it, you change it. End of subject.
Thank you, Mr. Oakham. Mr. Knox has withdrawn his question. Is there anyone else in the queue? My perspective on this is I want to thank Mr. Kehoe and Mr. Oakham for bringing this forward. It was Mr. Santos who had actually suggested this, and I need to decline that call. And what we discovered from our fiduciary council is that we have no capacity for properly compensating trustees who are not already employees of the county. And I've been here since 2011, and our workload has doubled. I think Mr. Kehoe and Mr. Oakham are acknowledging something that we need to acknowledge, which is that it's not clear that we function better for putting in twice the time that we put in 11 years ago. And this seems like a prudent experiment to me in pulling back some of our time. I would note about 2 years ago, we flipped the admin and disability meeting on fairly short notice. Some people predicted doom and gloom. I don't think we missed a beat. I think I agree with Mr. Santos that this is a worthy experiment. The thing I feel least strongly about is disbanding disability committee. I think those items could be there. I think a real question on the BOI side, our committees don't meet monthly. They generally meet quarterly. I think a real question of how much do we need on the agenda? And if we're being candid, a reflection on, do we fill the agenda simply to sort of justify the monthly operation is, again, a worthy part of the question. Obviously, our mission is not to reduce our time meeting. Our mission is to provide and protect the benefits for our membership. I'm not convinced that in doubling the time that we've been putting into this, we have done that better. And I think it's worthy to consider whether we can pull back. I would also note, we really, as Mr. Knox commented, have meeting bloat. We have an audit committee that years ago met once or twice a year generally, that's now meeting practically monthly. We have a lot of other meetings, but short of a major examination of everything, which would be logistically complicated and perhaps not even feasible, we just need to sort of find opportunities to get the work done well and more efficiently. And I think this is a reasonable proposal. So that's what I wanted to say. I see that Ms. Gray has come into the queue. You are next. And if anyone else wishes to speak, just post something in chat and I'll be happy to call on you.
I have a quick question, and I wasn't quite clear about what you were saying, Mr. Bernstein, about compensation. This is what we signed up for. At least I know as an elected member, whether or not I was getting my full salary or not, I signed up for this. And I'm looking at, as I said before, our members, and I'm looking at staff and how much work they put into their presentations, which sometimes we just say, any questions on the presentation? They haven't even given it because maybe the slides are included in our materials. They say no, and we cut them off. And they're standing there ready and willing to present to us the work that they have done for us. And we just say, okay, that's it. And then I also look at the move that staff will have to make in order to go to a 1 meeting per month with respect to the disability cases. But my biggest question, and I just am not clear, Mr. Bernstein, what you were saying about compensation for, I guess that would be for appointed members. What does that have to do with 2 meetings or 1 meeting?
It has nothing to do directly. I'm just saying that we've doubled the amount of time that we put in over the 11 years that I've been here. And it appears to me, based certainly on the BOI's experience of going from 2 meetings to 1 meeting years ago, that we could get our work done equally effectively, not less effectively, equally effectively in a more time condensed manner. And this is well designed to me as an experiment. If we certainly have all been through months where we combined meetings, there's nothing new there. We're just going to try, if we pass this, for a few months to combine meetings and see how it goes. If it goes well, I imagine it will continue. And if it is challenging, then we will all acknowledge the challenge. I also want to say that I think collegial disagreement is tremendously important and a reflection of high board functioning. I think you and I disagree, Ms. Gray. And as always, I respect and admire you. And if we cast votes differently, there will be a winner of the vote. And I will, as I'm sure you will, align behind the majority of the broader trustees. I don't think there's any problem with us reflecting on this and disagreeing. It's not a specific compensation issue. It's an efficiency of time management issue.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. I just, I want to be clear. I have been here as long as you have. We've done combined meetings occasionally here and there, and definitely when we have SACRS conferences, we combine the meetings. And yes, the audit committee has taken on a tremendous amount of work. And I know for those of you who have the privilege of being on both boards, it is a lot of work. But again, this is what we signed up for. I am not afraid of change. However, we've been through this before. I've been on both sides where we have had one long meeting. And I'm going to be honest with you, when it comes to the disability cases, there have been times where I'm just like, okay, whatever staff recommends, when really, I did have comments, but I was just exhausted. And quite frankly, yes, if we stopped at 3 o'clock, that's a long day anyway, because your brain, at least at my age, your brain can only take so much, okay? And this is like very focused work. I just, I enjoyed disagreeing with you, Mr. Bernstein. We do this all the time, even outside of our board meetings, not, in violation of Brown Act. It just has to do with other stuff. And it's very healthy to have these discussions. I just feel that this is not a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Mr. Oakham in the queue now, and if anyone else wishes to be added, just shoot a note in the chat.
I think everything has been said. The only thing I was going to do, and he might not want to react to this because I'm hearing stuff that I don't agree with about staff. Staff has certain things to do. Maybe they got to do it a little quicker. But they, maybe we don't meet on the first Wednesday, maybe the second Wednesday, which makes it easier for them. Mr. Santos, what's your reaction to this for staff? And if you don't feel like you want to answer the question, don't do it.
No, I can. I'm assuming you're asking Mr. Kryman, right? Just
yes. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. I'm asking. Yeah. I'm not asking the other Santos because he doesn't run the organization yet. Yes.
But I'm ready to respond. I'm only kidding.
We did poll the staff and ask what impact it would have. I've been assured by all of my division managers that we would be able to accommodate whatever the board would like to do. The first month may be a little scramble, but we definitely can adjust as we go.
Thank you.
Mr. Santos and then Mr. Knox.
One last comment. Vivian, I love you. I have tremendous respect for you, but I humbly disagree with you. We are accustomed to do trials way up to 4:30 for weeks, at least in my case, with death penalty cases. And I cannot, for the life of me, say that I did not give everything I could for my clients after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So this is no different than being in court or doing any other job. We usually have to work till 5 o'clock or whatever time might be, and we roll. So again, I respectfully disagree.
I have Mr. Knox in the queue.
Just procedurally, I brought this up in my comments earlier. This is before us to vote on today as a trial period. But then again, at the end of the introduction, it talks about the board leadership elected in January 2022 can reevaluate this change and determine the best path forward. So I guess, Mr. Kehoe, was the intent that we would all vote on this again? And I know Mr. Santos, mentioned in his comments, we could talk about this in December and see what worked and what didn't. But just so I'm clear, who decides if this does pass, whether it becomes permanent or it goes back to the way it was before? Just board leadership at that time, or a vote of the trustees?
Yeah, great question, and I'm sorry for not identifying that in the memo, but it would be a vote of the trustees. The intention was that we would have, potentially new board leadership in January, who would then bring it to the board for discussion and lead a discussion about how successful it was or not successful. So it's ultimately designed for us to sit down, have the conversation, and say, this worked out good or it didn't. So it's a trial period, not tying anybody's hands in it going forward.
Okay, thank you.
I have Mr. Moore, then Mr. Gray.
Gray?
Okay, I got two things. One, the previous comment about the change and being reevaluated. So if this is voted on to revise the schedule today, it effectively becomes a permanent change unless it's reaffirmed January 1st, or does January, we go back to the regular schedule? So that's a question I would like to know the answer to. And
I think
secondly,
Mr.
I have one other thing, but of course, when we receive the disability cases, we have 2 to 3 weeks to review them. So if we have our meeting on the first Wednesday of the month, does that mean we're only going to have 1 week to review our disability cases, at the same time to review the regular agenda and any committee agendas?
So I'd like staff to clarify this. I believe the two questions, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Moore. Can you confirm that this is set up to have a sunset in it, Mr. Rice? And does this in any way change the amount of time that we have to review disability cases?
With respect to the first question, by its terms, this is for a trial period only. So therefore, in February, barring any further board action, February 2022, we would be back in the normal 2-meeting a month schedule. This is explicitly a trial period for 5 specified months, September 2021 through January 2022. As far as the effect on the time to review disability cases, Ricky, Tamara, Frank would have to answer that question.
I'm prepared to respond.
Tamara, please.
Good morning, trustees. There should be no impact. What we would do is adjust our mailing date to ensure that you still have the 2 weeks to review the cases.
Mr. Moore, does that answer your questions?
Yep.
Thank you. I have Ms. Gray in the queue.
I just had a really quick question. You said that you would, or the memo says we would reevaluate in January with the new board leadership. First of all, that's making a big assumption. As you all know, Mr. Santos and I are both up for re-election, so we may not be here in January. And we may have new appointed members, so we're asking them to evaluate something or an issue that they have no privy to. All right, so that's something we have to take into consideration. If you were going to have, which as you all know, I disagree with this, but if this passes, if you're going to have a review, it should be by the deciding body today, so that it should be made in December. so that the incoming board leadership and trustees would know the whys, wherefores, and the discussions that we had regarding making this sort of change. That's my comment. So I think that it should be December, not January. So just in case, I can have my last say so.
Yeah. I have Mr. Oakham in the queue.
Yeah, Vivian, I agree with you 100%. I think that's what was proposed, that it would be done. It's a trial. Just to answer one question, if we need to, which we did before, if we had to reverse and have the disability cases first, so we would be bright, sharp, and everything else to handle those, we do that at first rather than at last, and, in the old days, that's the way that we did it anyway, when we had the disability cases first Wednesday. So I think there are a lot of ways to get around what we're talking about. Something, everybody has to make up their own mind on this. We spent 45 minutes on this question. And I don't think we have to sell anybody. I think you vote the way you feel, and that's the final decision. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Oakham. I have no one in the queue. I have to admit, I've been here many years and I've rarely been so unsure how a vote's going to turn out. But Mr. Keogh and Mr. Oakham, I think there was a friendly request to modify your motion for a December review rather than a January review, which hasn't been acknowledged. You are under no obligation, but did you want to accept that, or should we keep the motion as it is?
I think we'll have enough time. I would accept that.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think that's a very valid point from Ms. Gray to allow this board to analyze it. So that would be in December. So I'm good with making the amendment that it would be agendized for a discussion in December.
Okay, then the motion is amended to reflect Ms. Gray's suggestion.
Point of order, Chair Bernstein.
Mr. Rice?
Yes, Mr. Knox was the second, and he would need to agree unless we're.
Mr. Knox, it was not Mr. Oakham submitted the motion. Mr. Knox did second it. You are correct, Mr. Knox.
Yes, and I think Stephen and I were probably talking at the same time. I said I second the amendment.
Thank you very much. Very well. I see no one else in the queue. We have had a robust discussion. Are there any questions about the motion before I have Bonnie take the roll call? So a vote, an aye vote in this case is in favor of the 3 or 4 month experiment. So Bonnie, would you please take a roll call?
Mr. Knox.
Can I just ask one question?
Yes.
What day do you want to choose? You want to do it the first Wednesday of the month?
The motion is for the first Wednesday of the month.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that it didn't change. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bonnie,
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
No.
Mr. Santos?
Aye.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
No.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Mr. Harris?
No.
Chair Bernstein?
Aye.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 3 nos.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone for all your input on that. We are now on to, we're on to item 4D, which I think will be a fairly robust conversation. I'm going to suggest that we take a 10-minute break for people to get up and stretch. So I am ready. Thank you. We are back in order. If people could just screen on for a moment just to confirm quorum. And Bonnie, when you've established quorum, let me know and we'll move forward.
Okay, we are ready to proceed.
Thank you very much. We are now on to item 7D. This is a recommendation submitted by our ad hoc committee on board duties and responsibilities. There's a memo with a couple of different proposals, and I'll turn it over. I'm not sure if it's fiduciary council or the ad hoc committee chair, Will Pryor, who's going to start, but I'll turn it over to you all to present.
Well, let me ask Mr. Klausner to go ahead and start. I think he could provide a pretty good overview over the discussions that we've currently had, and then I'll maybe jump on after that. So let me start off with Bob, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Absolutely. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Pryor, and thank you, Chair and trustees. The ad hoc committee was appointed in response to comments from some members of the Board of Retirement about a drift of responsibility, and that the question really was, what are the original question is, what are the duties of the Board of Trustees and what are the duties of the Board of Investment, and where do they intersect and where do they not? And we had a number of meetings. We met on March 17th, May 18th, June 8th, July 20th, and July 28th. And what you see in the memo, which is in your board materials beginning at page 500, is the report of the committee, and where the committee's discussions went, and it was a very robust discussion, was that the JOG-C, in their opinion, was being used rather than when the board of retirement should act on its own, whether the Board of Investment should act on its own. We used as a guide for the statutory obligations of each board a memorandum which the Chief Counsel had written in 2018, which specified the 23 places in Searle where the Board of Retirement's duties are outlined, and 24 places in Searle where the Board of Investment's responsibilities are. And there are a couple of places where you have to get along, where you have to work together. And the two places generally where you have to work together are budget and hiring of certain of your executive officers. And there are other places where it makes sense for you to work together. And if you go to page 504 in the materials, you will see that the recommendation of the original recommendation of the committee when we met the second time was to abolish the JOG-C. But in further discussions, it was determined that just saying we'll get rid of something and not offering an alternative is, wouldn't be helpful to the rest of the Board of Retirement, and it wouldn't answer the questions that was in Chairman Bernstein's mandate. So on page 504, you will see budget, education and travel, appointment of the Chief Executive Officer and Chief Legal Counsel, classification and salaries for staff, because that's part of an ongoing discussion with the county government, certain system-wide policies, because you all should be bound to the same internal LACERA developed codes of ethics, conflict of interest, and I believe from the last JOG-C meeting, I think media policy. And engagement of fiduciary counsel was added in because when you were doing the interviews prior to my retention, even though it was not a JOG-C, you had people from both boards, and your fiduciary counsel, like many of your outside advisors, work with both. Actually, I think probably more than most of your outside advisors, we work with both boards. The last thing was the one point of debate, which was, is there an other category? And the one other category is if you had employment litigation involving one of those executives that you and the Board of Investment hire together, that you probably ought to have a joint discussion regarding defense of any of that. And that it was also added that the Chief Executive Officer, unless he was the person who was bringing the complaint, that he should be involved in the discussion as to whether defense starts with the Board of Retirement, which is primarily responsible for personnel, or whether it should be a joint BOI decision. Whether you keep the JOG-C with a modified charter, or whether you give the committee a new name, or whether you use a series of ad hoc committees, is really for you all to decide. But that's the sum and substance of the report, which was approved unanimously by the committee at its most recent meeting. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Chairman.
So I do have some questions coming in, but Mr. Pryor, I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak, and then I'll turn it over to questions. You're muted, Will.
Wish I quit doing that. So I think that was a really good summary by Mr. Klausner. And I did want to point out that, yes, we originally thought that disbanding the JOG-C and having a series of committees appointed by either or both chairs was probably the most effective way to do this. But we all reminisced back to the days when we did actually do that. And it was actually rather painful, especially when you had to have board meetings that were a combined committee of both boards. And those were a little unruly and a little hard to manage. And so there was quite a good discussion. And I did want to thank everybody who participated in the committee. I think the committee participation was very special because we have, JP Harris and we have 3 board members or 3 committee members that have extensive experience in meeting via a board and what do you do as a board or when you're a board chair. So I think that really helped. And we really had to say, okay, well, what's going to replace that configuration? And we felt that really the best way is to try and have as was mentioned by Mr. Klausner, a new committee or the current JOG-C committee, but with very refined topics of discussion. Then the question became, who's going to be the police on that? And Mr. Rice, volunteered. I don't know how else to say it, but he seemed to be okay with attending the meeting and making sure that the topics that are discussed are really congruent with the charter and what quite possibly could be a rewritten charter for the JOG-C. So I think as we go through this, hopefully there's recognition on everybody's part. We're just not here to tear apart the JOG-C. We're here to try and refine things because I feel it's important. And I think most members of the board that I've discussed this with feel it's important that when we're elected, we get to do the things that we're elected to do, not have decisions made by somebody else and just basically be a yes or no and not being able to participate in those discussions. So my recommendation and the ultimate committee recommendation was that there be a committee. Whether we keep calling it JOG-C, I don't know. And if we do keep the JOG-C, that it should be probably referred back. It's obviously it's a board chair decision, as was the original assembly of this committee. But it would be the board. We recommend that the board chair refer this back to the committee that's already established to go ahead and tighten up and rewrite the effective clauses that will give us the proper configuration that we talked about in our committee meetings. And I'm hoping that will be the motion that's made out of this. I'd like to hear some opinions. If not, I'll go ahead and maybe I'll swing in later and go ahead and make that motion if there even needs to be a motion, because again, this originated as a chairman committee, and whether it gets referred back for some more work, I don't know if it requires board action or not. So I'll let Mr. Bernstein speak to that one. Wanted to thank again the committee and Mr. Klausner for your hard work and being able to get together on Zoom a few times. And I'm interested to hear this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll speak later. I have Mr. Kehoe in the queue.
Thank you. So I definitely was a supporter of this ad hoc committee. I know that Mr. Pryor has been bringing up some concerns over the past number of years, and I think it's something that definitely needed to be addressed. And I also like the diversity on the committee itself. I think it was excellent, and Chair Bernstein, I think he did a great job at that. I was a little surprised at the ultimate outcome. It definitely was not what I was anticipating. Going back to the discussion on the JOG-C element, I would have liked to have seen an actual breakdown of it. This is clearly a board of retirement responsibility. This is clearly a board of investment responsibility. And this is clearly a joint responsibility, which should be handled by the JOG-C. So I do think that it's a little incomplete. And I hope my comments aren't taken as any personal thing. This isn't. These are just my thoughts. So I do think it's incomplete. My initial reaction was I also think the JOG-C should be a part of the ultimate conversation, since ultimately it's the charter of the JOG-C. And my initial thought process was actually in alignment with Mr. Kelly's comments, and I hope everybody had an opportunity to read Kelly's letter because it was very thoughtful. But it was in alignment with that, where I was going to suggest that we push this actually now to the JOG-C to discuss, see what they can tighten up on their charter, and then bring it back for a discussion. But hearing Mr. Pryor, hearing your comments, I would not be opposed to saying, hey, you know, I think you guys are going down the right path. Let's send it back to this ad hoc committee to then now clearly define what the ad hoc committee believes is a board of retirement responsibility, what's a board of investments responsibility, and what is a JOG-C responsibility, which would lead to a revision, if necessary, of the charter of the JOG-C. So I wouldn't be opposed to that. In other words, saying, hey, this is kind of a checking in point. There's still work to be done. Let's continue with that work and then have it. So I wouldn't be opposed to that. And when I read page 5 of the memo and I'm looking over the 7 items identified for the JOG-C, as the JOG-C chair, I look at it, I go, that's what I think we do. So I know that there was a cited point in the comments about a specific lawsuit that went directly to the JOG-C. I actually don't believe that it went directly to the JOG-C. I thought that it was by joint action of both boards, that it was actually submitted to be overseen by the JOG-C. So both boards could have certainly decided not to do that and kept it under the sole responsibility of the board of retirement or whatnot. So I see that might be something that we tighten up in the charter. But overall, I think a majority of these items are, I believe, already captured in the charter and the responsibility of the JOG-C. So all that being said, I would not be opposed. I'm definitely very interested in hearing comments, but I would not be opposed to sending it back to the ad hoc committee to tighten up those elements and bring it back to us, or possibly sending these items to the JOG-C to have the JOG-C look at and make recommendations on revision to the charter consistent with this. So I'm fine with either direction. I'm kind of actually leaning towards Mr. Pryor, your comments of being in support of sending it back to the ad hoc committee to come back with a little bit more clearly defined responsibilities and go from there. The last thing I'll comment on is I'm adamantly opposed to eliminating the JOG-C or renaming the JOG-C. There's no point. That's politically political more than it is actual structural. There's no point of renaming the JOG-C and eliminating the JOG-C. I just have night terrors of thinking about having our numerous ad hoc committees and joint board meetings and everything that got us to the JOG-C. So I think the JOG-C is beneficial. I definitely want to see very clearly defined roles for BOR, BOI, and the JOG-C. And I also, last comment, I promise, I also believe whatever comes out of this being an actual formal thing, that it absolutely has to go to the BOI and we have to get adoption from the BOI. And I know that the concern is, well, wait a second, the BOR, we're defining what our roles are. But if you don't have buy-in from the BOI, then you don't have a true document with any teeth, and you have the BOR fighting with the BOI. So let's formulate clearly defined roles. Let's agree on them here. Let's get support from both the JOGC and the BOI, and then all three elements can be in concurrence and say these are clearly defined roles. And then ultimately, the end of the day, that gives staff a very clearly defined path on how to handle issues that come up. So that's my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. I have Mr. Knox, then Mr. Oakham, then Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Chair Bernstein. And I had a few different things in no particular order, but I would agree with Mr. Kehoe in that going into this, I've heard Mr. Pryor be very consistent over the few years that I've been involved, questioning, hey, this seems like scope creep. Why is BOI weighing in? And I've always appreciated that he's been consistent about that. So I was expecting the report back. And before I forget, I want to thank those that were on the ad hoc committee because I appreciate their efforts. I was expecting to read like, yeah, these are the three key, gray areas, or these are the things that have turned into gray areas over the year that, excuse me, Ms. Gray, but that really are BOR versus BOI. And I was expecting more of a focus on that rather than a focus on the JOGC. I don't have the history with JOGC like some of you do, and I'm not necessarily pro or con of just that group. But I also don't know in my reading of it that it's the fault of JOGC if there is any scope creep, because I'm still not clear on who decides what is going to be agendized for JOGC. I was vice chair last year of JOGC. I'm a member of JOGC this year, but I still have conversations with my counterpart, Mr. Bernstein, over BOR. Okay, and what is this meeting for? And who set this one? So I think it would be helpful in clarifying what rightfully goes where if that conversation is more inclusive than it has been. Just my perception, it just is, hey, fit this JOGC on your calendar, be there, and we'll surprise you with what's going to be on there, at least the materials that are going to be part of it. Not every time, but that's just been some of my experience. So, Mr. Pryor mentions who's going to police this. I mean, I think we could do a better job on the front end of steering the appropriate matters there. And as Mr. Kehoe talked about, maybe just if there's a means of clarifying, tightening up the charter, that's fine. Bringing more clarity, but just applying that filter on the front end. And then the last thing I was going to note, oddly enough, Mr. Kelly mentioned in his public comment too, was just, in reading the report back and in listening to folks over time, I'm not an advocate of combining BOI and BOR, but it's just funny that the report is silent to that, because ultimately, if we kept wrangling over what was BOR versus BOI, why wouldn't we just put the two things together, and then whoever's on the board is over all things board related. So those were my comments. Thank you, Mr. Bernstein.
Thank you very much. I have Mr. Oakham next. Mr. Oakham? Let's come back to him. Mr. Rice, you're next.
Thank you, Chair Bernstein and trustees. The original ad hoc committee that's now reported to the board was appropriately appointed under the Brown Act by the chair, and it proceeded in accordance with the Brown Act. One of the elements that's required of an ad hoc committee is that it not involve formal action by the board. And now that this issue has been the subject of a committee report, comments by all the trustees, I actually think that even if there isn't a formal motion to send it back to the ad hoc committee, we've crossed the line. And so I don't believe it would be appropriate under the Brown Act to use the ad hoc committee as a continuing way of not having public discussion about the issues that are now public in the ad hoc committee's report. So my legal advice to the chair and to the rest of the board is that this issue should remain with the board at this point in time. And if there is a desire for there to be a revision, a draft revision of the charter consistent with the ad hoc committee report, the board can direct Mr. Klausner and me to put a draft together and bring it back to this board or to the joint boards or to the JOG-C, whatever the board directs, but keep it in a public forum, because I think we have crossed the line. It's really not appropriate to jump back and forth between ad hoc and public discussion.
Was the ad hoc aware of that concern?
No, this possibility of a referral back wasn't foreseen as far as I recall.
Wow, that's pretty shocking to me.
Yeah, I was not aware. But can I ask real quick, Mr. Rice, would you accept a letter on behalf of, as chairman of the committee, to you and Mr. Klausner with our concerns about the division of topics for each board?
So the four of you would be less than a quorum. So you could certainly comment to us as trustees sometimes do on various subjects to staff, and we could take those into account. It would not be appropriate to invite the entire board to do that, because then we're having a deliberation outside of a notice meeting where Mr. Klausner and I are the hub of the deliberation.
Just to chase that a little bit, if I can, Mr. Chair. One of the problems we had with actually coming in and strictly dividing what was going to be Board of Retirement, what's going to be Board of Investments, and what are the contents of the shared items. And by the way, there was some discussion, and I highly encourage that we follow a recommendation by Mr. Kryman, and that is that those topics that are a shared topic should be sort of an automatic agenda item. But those that aren't, if anything else is brought to the board to the boards, those should be only if it's agreed to by both board chairs, the Board of Investments and the Board of Retirement. The remainder of the issues we do. The problem is we have on both sides, we have some clarity, but the stuff that's specifically enumerated by the 37 Act is tough, and it can be seen a lot of different ways, and how it's interpreted might be important for us to discuss as a committee, which I guess we can't do now. So I guess we will have to lean on Mr. Klausner and Mr. Rice to specifically say what those are. And sorry.
Okay. Mr. Oakham, your hand is up. Did you want to comment?
Well, I abstained on some of the motions. I like this motion. I'm not sure Sean is not correct, that we maybe need to do some more work and bring back exactly what the responsibilities are. I think these 7 explain it kind of well. I think they're, I think in the memo it says this is statutory. So, and they're statutory, I think probably part of the statutory things. I also agree that, JOG-C should only be JOG-C. I don't think we should feel responsibility if we're not on the JOG-C to go to the JOG-C meeting. Then we're defeating what the JOG-C does. So I don't think everybody has to go to a JOG-C meeting. So Can you hear me? Okay. I'm
Yes.
sorry. I didn't have my microphone on. So, I mean, those are my comments, and I don't want to get rid of the JOGC, but I want to redefine it. And I think we have to redefine it to make sure everybody's in agreement.
Thank you. I have Mr. Santos and then Mr. Kehoe and then Mr. Harris.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. The comment will be that, you know, as a member of the committee, as colleagues could attest to, I was always ready to advocate on behalf of the Board of Investments. So the Board of Investments, in my mind, it was never left out. But here we are. I'm also suggested that perhaps the JOGC jurisdiction should be narrow, and pretty much the memo reflects the statutory requirements of what goes to the BOI and what goes to the Board of Retirement. So perhaps the best way to go from here is that a motion will be appropriate to send the memo to, and I could do that as a member of the Board of Investments if it's proper, to have the information in this report go to the BOI for discussions there as well. And of course, we continue the discussion here on the Board of Retirement. And it might be a situation that in the future, both boards decide that this will be more appropriate for the JOGC to reevaluate. But my understanding is that the statute is quite clear, but where there is an ambiguity or misunderstanding or misinterpretation by anyone, we should rely in our able counsel, either outside firm or both, to provide that legal interpretation where there's the vagueness in the statute. And that way we can proceed with the business of the organization where the matters involve both boards. So I guess Mr. Rice, would it be appropriate for a motion that this report we place on the Board of Investments agenda next board meeting or the following meeting, whichever is appropriate, for the discussion and perhaps direction of action, and for this memo to be further discussed by the Board of Retirement, and in an effort to come up with a determination as to how we're going to proceed. Again, I'm in favor of keeping the JOGC, but you just need to be narrow. That has been my position from the get-go in all committees, that we need to be efficient. One of my concerns that I had with the JOGC is, I don't know, perhaps I'm going to blame the staff, I guess, that when in doubt, just send it to the JOGC. That has been my interpretation, strictly my own views. So by drafting something that is very narrow and specific, it gives both the chairs and the CEO clarity as to what goes to the committee, and what is retained by the different boards, and that will be my suggestion.
So
I hope that wasn't convoluted.
To answer your question, Trustee Santos, about whether it's appropriate. So this board, a motion to direct the Board of Investments to agendize an item would not be in order. It's not appropriate. The BOI is an independent legislative body, as is the Board of Retirement, and they each control their own agenda. There are also some alternatives. So this board could vote to refer it to the BOI chair for consideration for placement on the agenda. Individual a second alternative would be for individual Board of Investments trustees to exercise their right under the Board of Investments bylaws to ask in timely fashion that it be placed on the Board of Investments agenda for discussion. A third alternative would be to suggest the chair of the Board of Retirement in discussions about the agenda for the next joint meeting, which is in October, I think, maybe September. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly right now. But to discuss placing it on a joint meeting agenda, and a fourth would be to send it to the JOGC. There may be others, but those are four that come to mind.
Thank you very much. I think my suggestion will be, and luckily we have the two chairs attending the meeting, that this matter be placed on the agenda at the joint meetings coming up. I believe it's next month for discussion, because that way it takes away from it was just a Board of Retirement or a BOI action. It goes to the joint board meeting agenda. At that point, there will be a discussion, and it might be a situation that at that point that my colleagues on both boards decide that it's probably more appropriate to go to the JAGC. Or whatever happens at the joint meetings is probably the direction that we will follow.
Bonnie has confirmed that the next joint meeting, based on the current schedule, is October 20.
How about if we just put it on the BOI agenda next week?
It would be, can I recommend that we hold off and not put it on any further agendas until we're able to produce what the next step really I see is, and that's the amending the JOGC charter and be able to present them a nice complete package. And that might take a couple weeks.
I withdraw my suggestion for now.
I'm in the queue and also have some comments as well.
Mr. Kehoe and then Mr. Harris.
Thank you. So I know, I feel like I know the direction that Ms. Pryor was going on that, and I think that it's premature to put it on a joint board meeting or send it to the BOI. I think this is an incomplete document. I see this as more of a, this is the direction that we're going. Can you confirm it? Can we move forward? I'm shocked that the staff did not address this potential issue of the ad hoc committee concerns. This is the first I've heard. I've been on the board 12 years. And the first that I have heard that checking in from an ad hoc with the full board suddenly is a King's X, where that ad hoc doesn't exist anymore. I just can't believe that. And I wish that would have been discussed amongst that committee before, because I'm shocked. That being said, I do think that there's a solution to it. The solution is, let's make an official committee. Let's make an official committee with the 4 ad hoc members on that committee. Let's adopt it right here today, and let's have that board, that committee meet as an actual agendized Brown Act meeting to complete this task. And of course, yeah, it's open to the public. Public can come and we can comment, but we give it back to the ad hoc committee, which is now an official committee, finish the task, then bring it back to the board of retirement, and then decide how to proceed. Because I think before we go off to the Board of Investments, before we go to the JOGC, I think we need to say these are the clearly defined roles of the BOR. These are the clearly defined roles of the BOI. These are the clearly defined roles of the JOGC. And to say, let's have council put that together for us, I don't think is the direction to go. I think that the ad hoc committee should still fine tune this with council on putting it together. So that would be my recommendation, would be step number 1, put together an official committee, however we could do it, where they can meet, finish up the work on this. Number 2, bring it back, have a robust discussion about that. And number 3, then present our recommendations to both the BOI and the JOGC, or singularly as a joint board meeting with clear recommendations, get everybody to buy in on it, and adopt any of those revisions. But I think at this point, we don't have a complete document to actually have a joint meeting and discuss it. We have a direction, and I think my opinion is that we seem to all be in the same direction, saying, yes, let's go ahead and clearly define it, but we still have it incomplete. So that's my recommendation. I think that we should proceed with moving that way, so that the ad hoc committee, that it will become a full committee, can finish up their work.
All right, Mr. Harris, then Mr. Moore.
Well, I can add to the discussion is I do agree with Mr. Santos that I think we we need to narrow the scope of the JOG-C. I think you all know how I feel about the JOG-C. This is not going to come as a shock to anybody, but I'm not a fan. And the reason I'm not a fan is because I think it detracts from my ability as an elected board member to exercise my fiduciary responsibility, unless I opt to go to all the JOG-C meetings, which I know I'm invited to hear all the discussion and be a participant to take in all evidence that they then make recommendation and come back to the board of retirement for us to make an ultimate decision. And that to me is just a total duplication of effort. That being said, I think the work we just did on the ad hoc did narrow down to where I think if the JOG-C was limited only to these items that are enumerated, and that it would be removed from a, it shouldn't need to meet more than every quarter, every trimester. So it ceases to become this entity unto its own that seems to be swallowing up the other two boards and becoming the driving force in the retirement system. Then I would be okay with that. But I think that is what needs to happen. And if what Mr. Kehoe is suggesting is the best way for us to come back together and finish our work and come out with a product that both boards could then agree to and better define what the JOG-C is responsible for and what it's not responsible for. I think it would help both the boards and also staff in knowing, what does go there, because I think it has become very muddy on what things need to go to the JOG-C. And it seems like, when in doubt, punt, and everything goes to the JOG-C. And I totally disagree with that. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Yes, I would support the general direction. I'm hearing that the roles of BOI, BOR, and the JOG-C be clearly defined. And with regard to the Joint Operations and Governance Committee, that the definition should be focused on operations so that we can determine, or at least have routine, regular processes that everyone normally identify with, that can fit within a schedule, time frame, with outcome expectations. In other words, routine processes like the budget, for example, limited to those kind of activities. And the other things that have overlapping jurisdiction or overlapping interests, I think because we have a CEO and a legal counsel and two board presidents, that group can determine how best to go forward with all of those items when they come up, which could be ad hoc committees, which could be one board taking the lead or another board taking the lead, or another joint committee dealing with a specific issue when it sunsets. So I also would like to raise the issue of how the Joint Operations and Governance Committee is constituted too. So I think that the board chairs shouldn't be on that joint committee. they should appoint representatives from each board. Maybe the vice chairs could be on that board. And that will allow that board structure to lean more towards routine, ordinary, everyday, expected activities, as opposed to governance and policy issues, which would be the preserve of the two presidents, the CEO and the chief counsel. So those are how I view this. And I don't know what the next steps are going to be from a process standpoint, but that outcome of clear definition is certainly needed before we can proceed with anything else. That's all
Thank
my
you.
comment.
I'm next in the queue. First, just so that I get it out of the way and don't forget, I want to thank Will for chairing this ad hoc committee and JP and Herman and Ron for serving on it. I really appreciate all the effort. I fundamentally agree that we need some additional clarification from the ad hoc committee. And I think we universally share a frustration that apparently we can't send it back to the ad hoc committee. Whether it is a mechanism of 4 individuals just agreeing in agreement with the Brown Act to chat, or creating a formal committee to let them continue their work, I'm open to that. And in terms of things like the composition of the JOG-C, it's just outside this agendized issue. We can bring that forward as a separate item, but I don't agree that we can focus on that under this current agendized item. So to me, that is a valid conversation for another day. But what I want to suggest, I actually had hoped that the ad hoc committee would be slightly more radical in their approach of what the BOR is responsible for. I would note, for instance, we presume that the BOI has an authority on the budgeting. I agree the BOI has to approve the budget, but I have been here a long time and served on both boards now, and I'm not sure why the BOI needs to be involved in the specifics of budgeting, non-investment issues, and then doesn't just vote to approve everything. Similarly, classification and salaries of staff, to me, is a completely BOR responsibility. The fact that something touches the budget does not convince me that it is the budget. And even the designation of policies, to me, that's an administrative function. So not only would I like to find a way for the ad hoc committee in a legally appropriate form to finish up their work, but I would encourage them as they go back to really take another pass at what can be truly brought to the Board of Retirement only. And I would note, at the risk of cleverly agreeing with everybody, that the JOG-C is flawed in certain ways, but is by far the best mechanism that we have. Frankly, the interesting thing is that somebody from the BOI submitted a very well-reasoned letter arguing that the BOI should be contemplated for extinction. I think that's a conversation that the BOI should pick whether they pick up or not. I don't think that's our conversation to be had. But what we have is a somewhat unworkable construct of equivalent boards. And I think we are currently navigating it well, except that the JOG-C has been too expansive. And finally, I would agree that how things get agendized to the JOG-C needs to be as restrictive as legally possible. There needs to be some way to make sure that the question before anything goes on the JOG-C consider something is, can this only be considered by both boards? And if it can be considered by one board or the other, it shouldn't go to the JOG-C. So those are my comments. And then I have Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. My comment is brief. I agree with Mr. Harris's comments. And at this point, in relation to the ad hoc committee, I don't think your work is done. I think that you probably got direction from the board chair as to a general idea of what he was hoping to accomplish, but that doesn't mean your work is done by this particular report. I think that you now have more specific direction as to what you need to look at. And Mr. Pryor, I agree with you that maybe you need to do just a little bit more. I don't agree with Mr. Kehoe in saying, well, let's just make this ad hoc committee a regular committee. I just think that this discussion is giving this ad hoc committee more direction. And, you know, just like we send things back to staff, we should send this issue back to the ad hoc committee to finish what they've done. And as you put it, Mr. Pryor, give us a nice little package.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. I believe now I have Mr. Kehoe.
Yeah, so Ms. Gray, I think you misunderstood my direction. So Mr. Rice is claiming that because we are having a discussion here in this boardroom, that it is no longer legally permissible for this ad hoc committee to exist, which is a little shocking to me because we've also, in past practice, have had ad hoc committees report to the committee on the status of what they're working on. I remember a number of occasions where this has happened. So I just can't believe that this is just thrown out as a curveball. So my solution on that is simply a legal issue, which would be that we create a committee called, you know, whatever we call this, and we place 4 members on the committee, which are the existing 4 members, and that they then meet and finish up the work. The only difference between the ad hoc version and this version would be that the ad hoc could meet behind closed doors. This one, they'd have to meet and agendize and make it public, which I don't think anybody, it has any concerns about that. I doubt that anybody on the committee would have any concerns about that. So that's my suggestion. So I think we're actually all in alignment that essentially we're sending this back to the group to fine tune the issues brought up. I think it was a very good discussion and a robust discussion. I think we just find the legal way to bring it and have it happen. And if with a formal committee, if not doing that and just going with the unofficial, okay, let's keep it less than 4 so we're not violating the Brown Act, then we can go that direction as well. I'm fine with either one of those directions. I think the cleaner and safer one is let's just go ahead as a board, adopt this, very limited scope committee to deal with this issue. And then once their work is done, then we'll vote to abolish that committee. So it's just more of a legal structure that is consistent with the Brown Act. Those were my thought process.
Ms. Gray.
I stand corrected, Mr. Kehoe. I totally misunderstood you. And I'm shocked that the committee's work is done. I mean, the ad hoc committee's work is done. You're right. In the past, over the years, we've often had ad hoc committees report to the full board and then sent back more defined tasks for them to accomplish. So I don't, I'm not running scared. I think that it would be just as easy to just tell the ad hoc committee to go back and do X, Y, and Z. But I mean, if you feel, if Mr. Rice is suggesting that we're, and Mr. Klausner, if we're on shaky ground by not doing so, just the end result is to finish up the work, however we get it done, ad hoc committee or committee with a sunset time or whatever. Let's hit the issues.
So to move this along, Mr. Rice and Mr. Klausner, please weigh in. I think we all would like to get more clarification on the ad hoc issue, which is catching most of us by surprise. At the same time, I think that Mr. Kehoe's suggestion to create a limited standing committee, which if the board is able to vote the members, that's great. I'm willing to publicly commit to reappointing the 4 people from the ad hoc committee, whatever the mechanism is. It doesn't hold up getting this work done while giving you all a little bit more time to review this ad hoc issue.
It would be perfectly permissible for the board to appoint a Brown Act committee consisting of the 4 ad hoc committee members to move on with the work.
I
Mr.
like the
Klausner?
motion.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. Can we just clarify one thing? Because I have not read this recently. I actually thought committee members were appointed by the chair. I'm perfectly willing to commit to reappointing, but just I don't want to create something that isn't properly created. Can we as a board vote the members? Is that permitted?
So under the bylaws and the charter, the regulations and the charter, the authority to appoint committee members belongs to all committees, belongs to the chair. So that would be the without deviating from those governing documents, the chair would appoint the committee members. But it would be a Brown Act committee. It's a board form committee, which an ad hoc committee is not. An ad hoc committee is not a board form committee. We're now talking about a board form committee. The chair would then appoint the members.
Good question, if I may, Mr. Chair, on this. So we don't need a motion for this. I mean, pretty much my understanding is the chair has heard all of us, and he retains the authority to establish a committee, and consequently, he will appoint whoever he wants. Is that where we are right now, Mr. Rice?
We can do it that way. However, my view is that it would be a Brown Act committee. So either
That's what I
way,
mean.
it's going to be a Brown Act committee.
Yeah, Brown Act Committee. So that's my motion. My motion is that the board creates a Brown Act Committee to continue the work of the ad hoc committee of the jurisdiction of both boards.
Yep. And that's what I seconded.
Mr. Rice, just to clarify something, please, before we discuss this and vote on it. Do we need to sunset the committee? Will it sunset automatically? Do we need to disband it at some point? How does that work?
You can sunset it. It can be sunsetted later. Since it's a Brown Act committee, it doesn't need a limited duration. It can continue on as long as it's serving a purpose to the chair, to the board.
Okay. Mr. Pryor, I know you wanted to comment, but I don't think this is the end of the conversation. Do you want to comment now, or do you want to?
No, I just wanted to thank everybody. I think everything's on the right track. Now we know what we want to do and keep the committee together. Refining their formation documents is pretty important. And I think we can do that. There is a lot of ambiguity. I think Mr. Bernstein brought up a couple of good examples that kind of haunt us, because we're really going to have to figure out how that's going to work. But that's why committees are together. That's why I think we got 3 other very insightful people that can handle those issues. And hopefully we can bring back a good product in a few weeks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klausner.
Yes, I was just going to say, I really appreciate the trustees' comments and guidance. I think it'll lead to a more complete product, because in the end, what we want to do is what you want, which is get you the answers to your questions. And this guidance is helpful to me. I don't think proceeding as a Brown Act committee is going to impair this work in any way.
Thank you. I have one final comment. Presuming this passes, as the new committee goes off to complete the work of the ad hoc committee, I realize that some of these things we can probably claim by right. Others may involve asking the BOI if they're comfortable agreeing. And I would just note that based on the conversation and based on the current board compositions, it certainly appears that the BOI is at least open to a consideration and conversation. So if this committee comes to exist, I would encourage you to consider the possibility that the BOI would be receptive to some new clarifications that would limit some stuff a little bit more completely to the BOR. So, anyone else? Bonnie, can we please take a roll call?
Bonnie, would you repeat the motion, please?
The motion by the board is to create a Brown Act committee consisting of the 4 ad hoc committee members.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Elcom?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Mr. Harris?
Aye.
Chair Bernstein.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay. And I will state here that I'm appointing the 4 members of the former ad hoc committee to this committee. If I need to create titles or anything, Mr. Rice, will you please get back to me about that? Certainly, if there is a need for a chair of the committee, I would ask if he's willing that Mr. Pryor chair the committee.
It is part of the chair's authority to appoint committee chairs and vice chairs when needed. So it might be helpful to resolve that issue now.
So I will appoint Mr. Pryor as chair and Mr. Santos as vice chair. Oh, and it's for me to move this along, isn't it? All right. We are now literally waiting for someone. Sorry about that. We're now on to item 8, reports. We have 4 reports that are all for your information. I'm sorry, 5 reports that are all for your information. I've had no request to pull them for discussion. So unless there is one, we will move on. Hearing none, we're on to item 9, items for staff review. Bonnie?
I don't have items for staff review today.
Thank you. Would you please call the usual lineup for the good of the order, Bonnie?
Sure. Mr. Pryor,
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Knox,
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Santos,
Yes, briefly, I think encouraging everybody to get vaccinated is really important. A friend of mine, they refused to get vaccinated because the FDA has not approved the vaccines. Unfortunately, he was infected with the virus, spent 3 weeks sick, one of them in the hospital. And it's so ironic that he refused to take the vaccine because he was not FDA approved. He ended up taking experimental drugs at a cost of $5,000 a dose, even though the drugs are not approved by anyone because they're experimental.
Yeah.
And the health insurance do not cover it. And
That's a smart guy.
so luckily he's better. He was released yesterday to go home, but it just truly highlights the fact that it is so dangerous to gamble with not getting vaccinated. So those are my comments. Thank you.
thank you. Mr. Oakham.
Mr. Santos, good comments. Thank you. I have nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
I have nothing to add.
Mr. Keogh.
I appreciate the robust discussion in the board today. I think it was very good, and a lot of topics that we covered that I think we all kind of went in the same direction and got to the right place. So I appreciate all the thoughts and comments, and everybody enjoy your August.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Well, I would say to Mr. Santos is I hope that guy's not an attorney that's your friend, because if he is, offline, give me his name and I'll never hire him for anything. But outside of that, have a wonderful August.
Ms. Gray.
Thank you. Very great, robust discussions. It gave everyone a chance to really voice their opinions and give it a lot of thought. And I would note that it is now 11:54, which means that all of the morning was spent on some administrative issues. And were we a combined meeting, then everything for our members, well, obviously this is for our members too, but everything for our members' disability applications, the other committees would be at about 12:30, 1 o'clock.
Appeals.
Excuse me?
Appeals.
Oh,
Yeah.
and appeals. And, that takes a while because, if you're really on it and paying attention, you're going to ask questions. So this particular day, had it been combined, would probably be a 3 to 4 o'clock meeting. But everyone have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. JJ Popovich?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Louis Lugo?
And just wishing everyone well month as well.
Thank you, Santos Kryman.
Nothing for me.
Steve Rice?
Nothing, thanks.
And Chair Bernstein.
I appreciate all the time and thought and input that everyone gave. I have attended NACD stuff over the last few years through the generosity of LACERA, and have learned, I think, to be a better trustee through that. Many of you have. I would encourage all of you. And I think we've really demonstrated cordial disagreement. And the one thing that I feel a regret is that because of the circumstances of the world, we don't get now to sit around and have a sandwich or eat a cookie or make a joke, to sort of come together with that cordiality. And it's looking like it may be a while before we get to do that again. I really miss that part, because I think frankly, Ms. Gray and I think we're the best example of people who just completely disagree on some things and never fail to get along. I just think that's really not a bad thing. I think that's what we should be aiming for, or at least accepting that and embracing it when it happens. So I thought it was a great meeting, and I want to thank everyone for all the input they gave. And we have an executive session now. So Bonnie, can you tell us what we need to do to get ready for that?
Yes, thank you. So any staffs and consultants that are not part of the executive session, you may go ahead and log off now. Any participants joining the OOC, you will be notified via email when to join. At this time, we're going to go ahead and turn off the live stream, and I will be telling you when we can go ahead and resume in closed session.
Wow, I thought we were done. Hence my comments.
We're just getting
nice
started.
try. We still got more to go. Yeah, and your comments were perfect. I hope people also realize that these are the months of the year when we have the lowest number of disability cases also.
Yep.
So yeah, stand by January, February, March. I mean, but
I may
anyway,
not
that's
be here.
water under the bridge, but your point was well made.
I may not be here. It's election time, so I hope
That's true.
everybody votes.
That's true.